The recording started. So first, I'm going to show you what Qigong looks like. So my vision with Qigong is very clear. Qigong is something that I am going to offer as a part of my professional practice in acupuncture. And Qigong is the mental or the mind practice that I will offer to folks who are interested in it. It's some people just want you to put needles in their body and they're like, I don't want anything else from you. And I get it. Some people, I'm not kidding. Like there was a lady who came in and if she rewatches this replay for some reason, you're awesome. And I like you a lot, but she came in with a piece of paper where she wanted the needles to be, the size of the needles that she wanted, the width of the needles that she wanted, how long she wanted them in. So basically, she had the entire treatment like planned. And yeah, Dr. Jha isn't going to do that. She's going to do whatever she wants to do. So I just found
What's
that
her,
whole dynamic interesting.
what's her background?
Her background is who, the person with the paper and all the
Well,
needles.
yeah, that's really specific.
I did find out later what her background is. Bottom line is she had just had a lot of acupuncture, so
Yeah, I mean,
she was very familiar with it. Yeah,
yeah, wow. I
and
would
then
have no clue.
yeah, and
Probably
then
knew where it felt good, like where, you know, this is where I
yeah,
experienced some good feelings.
maybe, but that's not how traditional Chinese medicine works because you treat the person that arrives that day. So it's not so. Let's say all four of us have the same complaint. Our arms hurt. Well, that's fine, but the needle points won't be the same for all four of us because we're all four completely different people. And my treatment on Monday could be different than my treatment on Friday for the same complaint because I arrived different that day for whatever reason. So that's one of the things I really like about traditional Chinese medicine is it treats the person that arrives that day. It's not trying to treat a disease or anything like that. It's not even really trying to treat the symptom. But really, what acupuncture is doing is it's encouraging the body to basically non-interference. It's encouraging the body to flow better um, through the application of needles. And that really fits with everything else, in terms of non-interference, getting out of the way. The needles are a way to help that process out. Qigong is a way to help prevent it from uh, is to help it's not really help to help prevent anything. It's to help maintain balance so that you're not constantly feeding what caused the ailment in the first place. Because if there's no behavioral change, then it doesn't matter how much acupuncture you get, you're going to continue to find yourself in a similar setting physically, right? So there's somebody who their knee is bone on bone and they play tennis and they're like, just by the way, I don't want to change my behavior. And we're just like, well, just so you know, acupuncture doesn't, grow you knees or anything. It'll help with the pain for now, but you're just going to find yourself in pain again because you continue to do the same thing. That's actually an amazing segue to today's topic because today's topic is about and just keep in mind this is something that I've created. Hunting power, I would say though, difference between Qigong and Qigong. Do you mean Qigong? Qi? Or because I don't know GI.
I saw GI the other day, and I thought, I mean,
I don't,
because I haven't, and I didn't Google it, and I haven't researched it, but I thought, well,
let me check. I don't know what
we
GI
spelled
is.
here YI, so I thought, well, I wonder what GI was.
No
I'm
idea.
just sure that's how I thought.
Gastrointestinal is the only thing that comes up when I
Yeah,
do the letters
exactly.
GI. But GI Gong. No, it brings up Qigong. So maybe you just thought it was a G, but it was actually a Q.
No, they spelled it G.
Oh, I
Yeah,
have
no,
no
that's
idea.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe
no,
maybe
that
they're
was
doing
definitely G.
maybe they're doing something too. But hunting power comes from the term hunting power comes from Don Juan. The way that I interact with it is completely different. Um, just because there's a lot of things philosophically, I guess, that I would view Don Juan as force, manipulation, attempting to control, and things that just don't jive with me. But some of his terminologies are golden. So I've adopted some of those terminologies, and true to the way that I do things, if I borrow a terminology or something like that, I always credit the source. So that's what I'm doing. That makes sense? So the segue is we have traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture and things that can help a person's energy start to flow better. And of course, non-interference, it will flow better on its own. And that's what Qigong is for. That's the mind part of it. Because if we don't take care of the behavior, and of course, where is that going to come from? So we'll take care of the direction of our mind, our attention, our intention, all of that. That will help. I guess prevent is a fine word. So it will help prevent the ailments that we were creating because we're no longer creating it. Our mind, our body, everything is doing something different. So if the behavior is eating bread for breakfast, lunch, and dinner 7 days a week for 10 years, that is an imbalance. That is going to accumulate. That is going to create an extreme, and true to the principle, it will cause suffering. In traditional Chinese medicine, it will displace qi. It will interrupt the flow of the internal energy body. The physical body will also have a derivative from that. The physical body will have ailment and will get sick as well. So the idea, though, is that with Qigong, we can focus on the behavior without focusing on the behavior. That's another key point about what we're talking about today, which is hunting power. And I'm going to have some caveats. So I'm going to put some numbers up here. I won't teach formally one-on-one hunting power unless these things are in place. So I'm happy to talk about it in a very general sense, but believe me, I see the trap in it. If these other elements are not in place, then almost every single aspect of hunting power can backfire. Does that make sense? Because the mind isn't in the place it needs to be. Does that make sense? And, excuse me, don't mean to sniffle, but I don't like esoteric, I don't like gatekeeping, but sometimes there is this thing that we call the accumulative principle. So things do need to accumulate to open the door to the next thing, that's not really levels. It's more like a tunnel, because you don't really level up. You're just continuing to pass through the same tunnel. It's just opening up more and more as you continue along, as kind of an analogy. So I will outline the system real quick, show you where we are with hunting power. I will show you what needs to be in place before we even think about trying this as a practice, before it's even possible. It's just not possible unless a few things are in place. That's actually the case with a lot of the hydrostasy aspects, though. So Qigong system, of course, means mind intention exercise. Qigong is energy exercise, or vital life essence exercise. Tai Chi is Qigong, but it's a little bit more physical as well. So you can actually start to get physical exercise from Tai Chi. You can from Qigong as well, but Tai Chi, depending on how it's taught, really focuses on building certain muscles, right? Specifically in your legs. That's going to be one of the main areas. Your thighs, your calves, that will build through a Tai Chi practice, especially Chen style. Yang style, maybe not. I don't know. I don't practice Yang. But Chen focuses on Zhen Zhuan, and Zhen Zhuan will build your leg muscles. It is inevitable. Even if you're doing it just a little bit every day, just a little tiny bit, it will accumulate and your leg muscles will strengthen. So I look at Qigong as mind exercise. I look at Qigong as energy exercise, and I look at Tai Chi as a blend of all of that. It's physical, it's energy, and it's mind. Does that make sense? And I've decided that the way that I'm going to offer Tai Chi is only in conjunction with Qigong, because where you put your mind in the Qigong practice is where you put your mind in the Tai Chi practice, especially when we start to get into what I call internal alchemy. That will include acupuncture points, it will include meridians, it will include traditional Chinese medicine, and it is still just Qigong. Where is your mind and did you put it there? I'm putting it on the three treasures, heaven, human, and the earth. I have three Dantians active. I'm doing the macro and microcosmic orbit. And when I say doing, I don't mean thinking about, I mean in this moment, you are using your intention. So in the first three layers of the practice, we really use the word attention. In hydrostasy and in hunting power, we can just start to use the word intention because they are connected. They are no longer separated through this practice. Through this practice, your intention is almost always aligned with your attention because you put it there. You've aligned them through the course of this practice. Does that make sense? In average cognition, in common cognition, intention and attention, because of distraction mainly, are not connected. Does that make sense? Oh, there's a comment. Let me see. Can't contribute but listening. Okay. Nobody ask Ida anything. I'm just kidding. Okay, so if all that makes sense, here is the roadmap for Qigong. Mind intention exercise. We have first up, basic alignment. And I have divided that up to core practice. And 2 is posture training, postural alignment. So we begin posture training. Now, the reason that I have introduced posture training is because in hydrostasy, we have the convergences of breath. The convergences of breath require physical relaxation. I have talked to, Bob is a specialist. Like if you ever got a massage from Bob, the word mastery would make more sense because the intention in his hands, in his touch, in his session is profound, pristine. It is. So when I talk to him about the body and things like that, I really value his opinion and his input. Why was I mentioning that? Oh, posture training, right. So we came together and we basically came up with what are the most important things for physical posture. One, or for physical relaxation. Of course, one is Qigong, relaxing the mind. That will help the most. And then the second is posture, structural integrity. If that's there, then you're only using the muscles that are necessary to perform the acts, and the rest of the body can relax. So, and then of course, breath work. And I'm going to talk about where all of that will fit in. We start though with just posture, and that is mostly informal. It's using the check and go technique. When I make the website, typically things that are like the core practice part, that will be a little book, and then I'm probably going to put the other part in little videos. So the posture training will be in little videos because that's just so much easier for me to communicate than trying to write out a book, and that could come down the road for sure. Pictures and all of that. I don't know. I think that's an okay way to learn, but I think videos with pictures and words and everything, that's kind of my plan right now. So basic alignment leads to counterbalance. If I had to guess, I would say that's where most who are currently practicing are at. Because warrior training is very specific. So I ask you if you're doing warrior training, the chances are no. So with counterbalance, it is pretty much just the core practice. I haven't really decided to add anything else because counterbalance is tricky. When you first start counterbalance, you are starting to interact with your own thoughts. You're starting to notice your thought streams, and you're hoping to remember to redirect when you see. This is a huge process. I still remember when I was redirecting 1,000 times a day, where it felt like, gosh, I wake up and I'm just redirecting all day because my thought processes are so habitual. I do remember that. I remember that at the restaurant, just thinking like, wow, like Tai Chi mind. I've been doing this shit all day. My mind is just 1,000 hamster wheels. It's not one hamster wheel. It's just switching back and forth between these thousands of different wheels. that's going to feel heavy, bottom line. And I'm actually going to begin the second book that way. I'm just letting people know, I'm not trying to discourage anybody. I'm just trying to set realistic expectations. I don't want to tell somebody that this is the easiest thing you're ever going to do in your life, and then it is by far not the easiest thing that they've ever done in their life. It's simple. The mechanics of it are very basic. It's very easy to understand, but because of the accumulation of momentum, it will feel difficult. It will feel like work. And the bottom line, the only thing we're really doing is remembering, recall. That is one of the most important words that we can talk about, is remembering. And if you if you remember, we were saying this in 2017, 2018, remembering to remember. All right, and then we get into warrior training. So this is one of the reasons I know nobody is really doing warrior training, is because I don't hear these questions about it. Because, and also, to be fair, I haven't really laid it out. So I have to lay out warrior training a little bit more clear, and then that can help. So one of the things that has been taking me a little while is I have been organizing the formal aspects of warrior training. The formal aspects are required for the training. It is very specific. I'm doing it for a reason. It has hydrostasy and the apex of that triangle, the capstone in mind. So it's all leading towards that. It's all helping with that process. They will be required. It's something you do every day. There's no we're not collecting things. We're not trying to just learn new things, to learn new things, to learn new things, just to say we did something. These are actually very specific, and they will be formal practices. And nobody under the sun has to do warrior training. You don't. And if somebody stopped at counterbalance, they're probably going to enrich their lives to the nth degree, and I love that. However, to make hydrostasy more accessible, warrior training is required, mainly because of the traps of thinking. If we're not addressing thinking about ourselves all the time, we're never going to create actual space, not deliberately, intentionally, and willfully throughout the day. You may find yourself there circumstantially, and that's okay. If you find yourself circumstantially in space, explore it, engage it, do your thing. However, it is different when it is deliberately intended. Intention. That's a powerful word, and I don't really use it until we start to get into hydrostasy, which is why I just remember beginning the first pillar was deliberate intent, but I can't really talk about intention until we are fully aware of our own attention and how those need to align. So informal warrior training, frankly, you all are very familiar with it, and you could just bypass a bunch of the riffraff. And are you thinking about yourself? Are you thinking about other people? Redirect using the rule of three. Bottom line. Any questions about that? That is very clear, and that is the primary component of warrior training, is to get a person to see how often you're thinking about yourself, and to use your counterbalance redirection technique of the rule of three. Does that make sense? Who's doing? Is anybody doing that? Is anybody feel like they're in, that they're doing warrior training, to at least to some extent? Of course, the formal practices you don't really know. Actually, you do. Well, who am I kidding? You know all the formal practices already. I just haven't put it on a video for you, but I have introduced the 18 gates warm up. I have introduced concentric circles and Superman. We know all and I have one from Dr. Jaw that I'm adding to it, and then the beginning of the form, at least the first section of form. The Tai Chi forms. The reason is because Qigong, yoga, nothing uses spheres and circles and gets in the joints, and nothing moves energy like Tai Chi. Maybe Bagua, but I still don't think so. Okay. Well, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but warrior training will boil down. It begins when you start seeing all of the other traps of thinking, trying to figure it out, comparing and contrasting, trying to understand, labeling, judging, all of this BS. Thoughts about self and other, definitely watching that. Then you are doing the warrior training. That is the main aspect of the warrior training that will help create gaps in the overall amount of cognition. That's what the first 3 layers of the practice is for. And keep in mind, these are layers. 1, 2, 3. Hydrostasy is broken into 3 sections. One is the gates of seeing, which I have actually modified a little bit, just a little bit, since I told Donna about them, but I think I have modified them just a tiny, tiny bit. No worries. The gates of seeing, and then so is that the gates of seeing? We've talked a lot about that, so I don't think I should have to explain too much of that. Expectations, results, watching these, thoughts about them. Yep, watch them and redirect. That's the practice. Just remember that little tiny, tiny piece of it. So you watch them, you see them, redirect using the rule of 3. Back to the practice, back to many points of attention as we can muster, even substitute dialogue, productive self-dialogue, anything that is beneficial for you as a part of your rule of 3. That's the key, the rule of 3. Okay. So hydrostasy is divided into 3 primary sections. And the second one, for some reason, is escaping me. Like I have all of this memorized and written down. The gates of seeing, the abstract principles. That's the one that I work with the most. So, of course, I remember that one. Oh, what we're talking about today. Duh. So those are the 3 sections of hydrostasy. Hydrostasy is the gates of seeing, hunting power, and the abstract principles. Abstract principles are just principles to help a person stay in a balance between abstract and literal, physical and non-physical, the seen and the unseen, the known and the unknown. We're going to balance ordinary and non-ordinary cognition. Typically, when somebody creates something or they talk about something like this, they cling to one or the other. They would say, well, let me introduce you to non-ordinary cognition. Our goal is to exist there all the time completely because ordinary cognition is evil. No, that's silly. Ordinary cognition and non-ordinary can blend together. They can, and then eventually in a different society that I imagine every morning, we wouldn't even use those words. There would be no point in talking about ordinary versus non-ordinary because they're already accessing the totality of the human experience. Known, unknown, unknowable. Yes, I will share the whiteboard again. And I'll save this because this is the basic structure of Igong. And Igong is something that I will create a website, a school. Eventually, when I'm a licensed acupuncturist, it will be a part of the way that I do acupuncture, because do you really want to be better? Like the acupuncture is going to make you feel good, but if you really want to get to the underlying imbalance of what is displacing your chi, we have to address how we're thinking, how we're moving, and eventually, of course, how we're eating and sleeping and all of that. All that makes sense? Yuck, my coffee got cold. I know some people like cold coffee. I do not. Okay, so I will save this whiteboard and then let's move on to the topic at hand. So that is the Igong system, and we're talking about the second aspect of hydrostasy, which is hunting power. And these are the prerequisites that must be in place. Engage, that's not right. Engage. This is the primary technique that must be in place, and it's called engage the space. This is the primary, fundamental, foundation technique of hydrostasy, and It must be in place before anything else that we talk about. If we talk about deliberate modulation, sensing energy, and the act of adaptation, hunting power, abstract principles, abstract anything, first, we can only talk about it through the lens of space. And what do I mean by space? I don't mean our environment. I mean the running stream of internal self-talk because of the first 3 layers of our practice. And then, of course, because of differential rotation in multiple directions of attention, you are now creating gaps in the overall amount of thought throughout the day. That was the goal. So in hydrostasy, we're assuming that we're doing this practice and we have started to affect that slider, that mindfulness slider, to the point where we are practicing all the time, all day long. From the time that we wake up, from the time that we go to bed, we have at least one point of attention active. That's the beginning of hydrostasy. Chances are we have multiple points of attention all throughout the day. Does that make sense? I don't want that to sound haughty. I don't want that, but I'm sure the more that folks are practicing, the more you see that there's no principle in the world stopping you from doing it all the time. Where is my mind and did I put it there can become an act of volition and will that is all encompassing throughout your day and even maybe dream state. I don't know. So any questions about that? So I'm giving you, okay, I'll write that down. So I started with engage the space, but of course, before engaging the space, we have to have an active point of attention all day long. That's how you create the space. Active. Still remembering the rule of 3, still remembering certain techniques, but you're no longer forgetting to direct your attention at will. Does that make sense? So the first requisite is that we have to have space to engage. And what I mean by engage the space, of course, is to pay attention to it, to place your mind on the gaps in thinking while doing your practice. And now everything else is accessible. We can deliberately modulate without words. We can sense into the present moment without words. We can choose how we want to feel without words. And hydrostasy will have a shared pyramid. You can make your own pyramid as well, because maybe you have certain things that you like to modulate to that is unique to your experience and who you are. Cool. I'm going to make one that will be common in the human experience because of this practice. That's what that pyramid will do. And I shared that pyramid, I think, last week, right? Was it last week that I shared the pyramid, the bottom being the base of the pyramid being appreciation, and then it kind of builds from that. And again, this is hydrostasy, so I'm not thinking to myself, gosh, I just really appreciate that I have a house, and that's an amazing technique earlier in the practice. That's not what I'm talking about. Does that make sense? That's why engaging the space is so important, because in hydrostasy, we're not thinking it as much. We're just choosing it. That's why we can start to talk about intention directly, because now you're starting to realize that intention, when combined, you don't need words to create. You can literally, it will feel just like just new energy, but powerful, deliberate, purposeful. All that makes sense so far? Okay, now this is another one, and it can be a little bit tricky, and I feel like it should be obvious at this point if we're going to engage this part of the practice. We cannot, I should have put that in capital letters, even though, we can't not do something, but if we're truly doing this practice and we have created the space, we cannot leak power.
You have 2 number 1s.
Oh, yeah, okay. I'll draw an arrow. It's a connected.
Okay.
Because I guess in order to have the engaged space, there must be an active point of attention all day long. In order to create significant and apparent gaps. Because if there is a gap and you're not paying attention, you won't know it. You'll just kind of just be zenned out or like just kind of, I don't know. It's kind
That
of
line,
there.
the line of thought with
Mhm.
the spaces between it, that really illustrated it. Like I can't engage the space without seeing that broken line now.
That's okay.
Yeah,
That's-
and the
that's what I see.
lines get and it's reflective of where I am, how big the lines are and how big the spaces are.
Yep. And just be truthful in your own practice, because this isn't a race. Remember, I'll be doing this practice until I'm 110 years old. And
It changes throughout the day.
it does, sure. And it's just really important to not hustle yourself. If you are not creating significant gaps in your thought, you are not creating, let's just keep doing the warrior, because if you're not creating gaps, what are you doing? You're thinking about yourself, or you're thinking about other people, or you're comparing, contrasting, trying to figure it out, trying to understand, or maybe even other types of thoughts have just started to get into an imbalance, like creative thoughts. That's also possible. So does that make sense? And I'm not trying to create levels or separation. It's just this practice is supposed to do something, and it will. And when it does, it gives us access to other things, such as non-ordinary cognition. And now we can combine our ordinary and our non-ordinary, and we end up with something very similar and akin, and builds off of dream walking. The feeling of freedom, the vacation feeling, that's all the same shit, kind of different degrees of it. The reason you feel so nice on vacation is because you've given yourself permission psychologically to not think about your bullshit. You've probably gone somewhere else, so you don't even see your bullshit. And then you've probably engaged yourself in pleasure, so you don't feel the bullshit. And now all of a sudden you're free. And then we get into this dynamic where I want to move here. It's because of here that I feel this way. I do agree that there can be circumstantial interactions with the moment that will be relative to that circumstance, like winning the Super Bowl. Winning the Super Bowl is winning the Super Bowl. There's nothing else like it. And you can't fake it, make it, invent it. No, you have to actually win the Super Bowl. You can still be super excited and be successful, you know, all of that, yada, yada, but it's very circumstantial. So that's okay. I wouldn't rely on that, because that's a trap. So the idea is that in hydrostasy, we are creating space because we're maintaining multiple points of attention. Our practice is quite pristine, but we're redirecting. I redirect. I use my rule of three just differently for different reasons. Not because I'm thinking dumb shit, but just because I'm starting to go a direction with my attention that I don't want to go. I see it, I feel it. I'm in that hydrostasy circle, and that's what I call the hydrostatic effect. I can feel even a little bit when I'm starting to go out of balance, and I'm like, ooh, 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 ooh. So we cannot be leaking power and even think about hunting power. Those are two opposite things that are occurring. And they're incongruent. And it is very likely, if you haven't created the overall space in your cognition and done the warrior training, you will leak power with warrior with this type of training. If you haven't done the practice the way it's outlined, it's very likely that we'll start looking at our behaviors and our habits, and we'll start beating ourselves up, or we'll start focusing on the multiplicity of self. If you can't look at yourself and not think about yourself, do not start this practice. It's not for you. It's just not time yet. We're not there. We're going to create psychological suffering with this. This is all Ernest taking responsibility for what he shares. But this is one of the most critical components in conscious creation that I can possibly think of, is this type of training. It's a focus of intent and will to the nth degree. So do those first 2 points make sense so far? We have to have space. We cannot be leaking power.
Yes, and I can see where hunting power to counterbalance leaking power is a trap.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, that would be terrible. And that's why I haven't really talked about this until I've outlined these 20 topics. So hunting power, the word hunting is relative to stalking. And yes, 100% I've stolen these terminologies from Don Wong, using them differently. Still, the terminologies are perfect, because we are when a person hunts, they observe, they want a quiet mind, they just want to be able to see what is going on without judging it, labeling it, comparing, contrasting. We just observe so that we can see the routines, we can see the behaviors, we can see the patterns. And ultimately, because we're in the hydrostasy effect, we can feel how these things are affecting us. And it won't feel good. And then our mind will start to default to the dynamic of feel good, want, feel bad, don't want. Very simple dynamic. That third bowl of ice cream, taste good, feel terrible, don't want. And now all of a sudden your mind is choosing what's best for you. Your energy and your energy body are all working together to keep you in that balance. And you're just using the basic dynamics of the mind and body that you were given. You're just using the bits and the pieces that we have available to us, such as that basic dynamic of all life on Earth, unless it's tied to procreation or something like that. Like there are some reasons for evolution purposes that a creature will do something that doesn't feel good. But that's why, because it's a biological thing. They're trying to procreate and continue their species. But for the most part, especially in the human mind, we seek to avoid what is unpleasurable and we seek what is pleasurable. We'll work with that dynamic. We don't have to reject it. That's what the hydrostasy effect does. We can work with that dynamic when we're in the hydrostasy circle. Again, that is all feeling. What do you need in order to perceive that feeling? Pristine attention without interference. Make sense? And then we start to get into conscious, deliberate creation. So this triangle starts to come into play more and more and more when we're hunting power. Because we're observing, we're seeing. You'll see your own intentions, you'll see your own desire, and you'll be able to evaluate without words whether this desire is aligned with intelligence, or if this desire is being led by the four destroyers. So you want a new Ferrari? Okay. You would be able to evaluate on your own whether that new Ferrari is tied to the four destroyers. It is. Or, I'm just kidding. It most likely is, though. Whether that Ferrari is tied to the four destroyers or it's tied to the intelligence of the fabric of the cosmos and the universe itself. How do you know it's tied to the fabric of the cosmos and the universe itself? It's one for everybody. It's cohesive. It's in balance. We're not orcas. We're not just intelligent creatures that just know how to be apex predators. Our mind has evolved to the nth degree, maybe even beyond what we even are accessing or even understand. I think all of us can get behind that. That basically there's a whole lot more to the mind and the human experience than we even know. That's what I'm saying. All right, so let me explain this triangle and then how this starts to interplay. Oh, I'm doing that. I did that wrong. Well, that's not wrong because it will still be the same triangle, but I'll just keep it consistent. Ah. Is that right? Desire, intention, and will. No, because knowledge. Let's see. What am I doing here? Oh, okay. Yeah.
Switch knowledge and information.
No, this is wrong. Sorry. I get into my. There we go. Okay. So we start to interact with this even more through the practice, and our desire and our intelligence will start to come much closer together. And then before you know it, the things that you are desiring are evolutionary for the species, for you specifically, but is also for the species itself. So, and again, this can be felt. One of the reasons that this can be felt is because the hydrostatic balance or the hydrostatic effect is the circle that we put around this triangle. When we're in the hydrostatic effect, that starts to basically overlap all of these different elements so that there's no discernible difference. Our intention just starts to align with wisdom, which is acting on our knowledge. Our underlining power of willpower, starts to align with our information and our experience and our shared experience, our knowledge. And now, before you know it, intelligence, knowledge, and wisdom are operating pristinely together. Our desire, intention, and will are operating pristinely together. And then they start to overlap. And that is the definition of conscious creation. Intent, the direction of your mind, the direction of your focus, without words, leads to conscious creation and behavioral change. Hunting power, another reason I call it hunting power, is because if you are doing this practice, we imply that you are holding a point of attention all day long.
Right.
Intention and will build personal power. So you are building personal power, and by building, I just mean it's flowing better. This is just a way of talking about it because it feels like it's building. That's why we would use that word. It feels like, wow, I have more. Not more necessarily. It's flowing smoother, stronger, and it's more powerful when it is less interrupted. Does that make sense? So behavioral change looks a little bit like, okay, Shayna tells me that she doesn't like the towel on the bed. And I actually can give a million examples, Shayna, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to throw all of these examples out because this can get into, it can get weird. But there's a ton of things that I can give the example of where something is mentioned and I do it again. And I threw that towel on the bed. I'm not trying to control. I'm doing my practice. And I felt, I don't really want to leave the towel on the bed. And I'm talking it to you. I'm not thinking it in my mind. It was a feeling. It's like, well, I mean, I know that towel is uncomfortable when it makes the bed wet, and it's lazy to just throw it on the bed. I'm not just going to say that, like, I can't help it. That's a stupid sentence. I can help it. And then so because of my attention, because of my volition, because of my will, because I'm in alignment to the present moment, I put the towel in the hamper or I hang it up. And then it never happens again. Maybe once in the last 4 years or whatever. And then sometimes because it has more momentum, the habit, it just takes longer to break up. You see it, you observe it, you know how it feels, you redirect if necessary, and eventually the behavior starts to break up on its own because it doesn't feel good, no matter what the behavior is, whether it's lying, whether it's trying to control other people, whether it's ice cream, it doesn't matter. If it is taking you out of your hydrostasy circle, you will feel it. And in this practice, your mind will begin to identify things as don't feel good, don't want to do, even if it is a long-term established habit. And you might not stop it instantly. You may not drop it right away. If you're doing this practice, that's not a problem because you're aware of the time flux. You will be creating habit for the rest of your life. You will be identifying that habit in the moment and redirecting. I did that backwards, sorry. You have been creating habit your whole life. You are creating some sort of habit right now. And you're going to be aware of that because you're doing your practice. And in the future, you're going to be creating habit to some extent. And that's what this practice, that's why it's a lifelong practice. So I don't need to get down on myself because I continue to do a certain habit or a certain thing. I just continue to do my practice. If I start to feel bad, then I very likely erred. I've started to think a certain thought that has backed me up. So you start to look at your behaviors, You start to look at their results and how everything is making you feel. And this is also how balance is so relative. I can't look at Lisa and say that third bowl of ice cream, tisk tisk. I don't fucking know. But if she's doing her hydrostasy practice, she knows. And if she's doing her hydrostasy practice, she won't leak power, she won't beat herself up, but her body, her spirit, her mind are aware that this act, this behavior is taking us out of balance. And the more that we engage in that process, the more the body, the spirit, the mind craves that equilibrium because there's power there. Is this making sense? So all kinds of behaviors, like I could go into sexual behaviors, social behaviors, personal behaviors, like studying and all of these different things. And there's no perfection, but everything for me continues to improve because it continues to go back to balance and stay in balance. Just for example, a long-term habit of mine, specifically with things like school or learning, I would really want to focus on just getting that shit done. I just want to get to the end. I just want to have the degree. I just want to have the knowledge. I just want to get to the end. I have broken that habit because I have seen, and this is the seeing aspect of hydrostasy, the perspective. I have seen that I love learning. So very likely I'm going to be 110 years old signed up to somebody's course because I want to learn something. I enjoy it. Some people just enjoy, actually all people to one extent or another enjoy learning. We all just enjoy learning different things. Some people want to learn about video games and programming. Some people want to learn about astronomy. Some people want to learn botany. But pretty much everybody has something that they enjoy learning and they love sharing that knowledge, enriching that knowledge, growing that knowledge. It can be very diverse. That is a human characteristic. Typically, every human being enjoys learning. Different things, but learning nonetheless. The mind likes it. That's a dynamic. So in this practice, what was the example I was using? Wasn't I using an example? I think I was giving an example of my own behavioral change of, was it study habit? No. I can't remember. It was just 2 seconds ago. I can't rewind it though. What was I
You were
just
saying that you always like to get to the end, but you don't do that.
yeah. So I'm in a 130-hour college program. I feel no anxiety. I feel no rush. Why? Because that doesn't feel good. Why would I do that? That feels terrible to constantly just wish to get to the end and just try to get through shit. It feels absolutely terrible. And then I could see that I have always been learning. I'm learning something right now. I'll be 110 years old and learning. So who fucking cares? Just learn. Just do your homework. Just do your stuff. You'll be fine. Does that make sense? What do you mean skipping steps, Jerry?
Sorry, I hit a button. No, we've just talked about that over the years in class. Skipping steps. Don't be skipping steps. It just doesn't, it's icky.
Yeah, I would say really the only step that we have in this entire process is the accumulative principle of momentum. It accumulates if you do it. It doesn't if you don't. Or if you do it sporadically, it doesn't, it's not, there's no continuity. So it's up, it's down, it's up, it's down. It's today I'm practicing and tomorrow I'm in absolute emotional shambles. So I don't know. I mean, I could sit here and just make this entire next hour about myself and just talk about all of my behavioral changes and then the ones that I see and that I still see that is moving me away from my hydrostasy circle and how I'm interacting with those things. The habit of taking things personally. The moment I start to feel that, I'm like, well, wait a second. This isn't about you. And even if it is, you don't have to think about it. Just observe, pay attention, engage the moment, go back to your practice. And that's the tricky thing. If we're still in the earlier portions of the practice, it is going to be very hard to observe yourself without judging, labeling, comparing, contrasting, and eventually violating every single trap of thinking in warrior training. But the behavior will change in this process, and hunting power I do start to introduce little techniques, little things that you can do, other aspects of practice that will help the intention and will. And one of those will be to really buckle down on what we learned in warrior training, and that's some of the formal practices. And then eventually we get into sleep, nutrition, movement, things like that. Those are things that are required for the human body. I don't care who you are, you must move. It's a principle, or everything will go into atrophy. Muscles will go into atrophy, joints won't move as well. So you can sit and wish upon a star all you want to, but you live in the human condition, biological entity, carbon-based life form. And yeah, there might have been that one person who didn't give a shit about what they ate and they never suffered out of the 7 billion people on Earth. But I'm not taking that gamble. So I'm gonna be more intentional and more consciously create rather than just throw some coins up in the air and hope they all land heads. Does all this make sense so far? Any questions?
It's the same thing we learn in the beginning, except we do it we do it grossly, gross concepts. Just maintaining a point of attention was work in the beginning. And it's still about the same process, basic alignment, counterbalance, self and other, seeing. It's all a process that builds, it fine tunes upon itself. It's the same practice in basic alignment. It's the same balance in counterbalance. It's the same it's been the same practice all along. The steps are the same. The intention is the same. Points, having a point of attention, holding it for as long as possible. It's just we do it in a with a lot of habit and momentum to the contrary in the beginning. And then it fine tunes over time with practice. The practice accumulates. And so we're able to fine tune it. I think it's more about from gross motor coordination to fine motor coordination, as opposed to skipping steps. We can't skip steps. It's the same if you don't have a point of attention all day long, you're not practicing. That's it. So you can't build from there. You can't skip from there either. So you can't fine tune from a place of out of tune. So when you say, I always wanted to get to the end, and now I say, I realize I enjoy learning and I'm always going to be learning. You're learning when you walk from your apartment to work every day, because it's something new all the time. Otherwise, you're not practicing, right? If the walk becomes something that you do below the threshold of recognition, then you're not practicing, because you're just not practicing. You're not, if everything is faded and there's nothing new happening. So whether you're sitting in a classroom with new stuff happening that you've chosen because you put it there, or you're walking to work and you're learning because you've chosen and you put it there, it doesn't matter. So you can set it up any way you want, and your desires, the totality of Ernest in this body on this earth at this time, chooses different things than Donna in this body in this earth at this time. My mother used to say, and that's what makes the world go around. Like the difference is the equalizing factor, or the differing factor, is how much are you in this moment or not in this moment? How much are you above the threshold of recognition or below it? So yes, I can see why you're saying you don't even want to teach this. I'm curious why, though, hunting power is specifically dangerous in your mind, and that because all of it is not, you're not able to teach any of the hydrostasy practice without the rest of it being there. So
Hunting power specifically focuses on behavior. So you are really hunting your own behavior, but it's so dangerous to hunt your own behavior if you're, and I know that we don't have steps here, but I can still see why Jerry's statement still applies, because maybe somebody just immediately wants to skip the whole practice and just go straight to hydrostasy. You just skipped everything. So, yeah, there are no steps, but I could still see how that phrase makes sense, So the reason that hunting power is so dangerous is because the techniques designed are to observe your own behavior and how it feels. And specifically, whereas the gates of seeing isn't. The gates of seeing you're setting up so that you can enlarge and enhance your perspective through technique, so that you can see things a little bit, I wouldn't say more clearly, but you are cleansing and you're not just shifting, or you're not just slightly modulating, you have shifted your lens of perception and you are steeped. So seeing, the gates of seeing helps you to balance and engage non-ordinary cognition. And that's kind of its specific focus, is to help with that, what we're calling that luminous effect. And we've talked about it, it's a popular thing that people can speak about, but we're actively feeling it and engaging it, and we give it our attention, and that becomes a technique in and of itself. So that's its focus. In the hunting power focus, though, we really do start to look at our behavior, because our behavior will continue to lead us to imbalance if it doesn't change. And the only way it will change deliberately and intentionally and willfully is to be deliberate with our intention and our will in regard to our behavior. And it's dangerous because if we haven't done this practice and we haven't created the space, a person will likely just label, judge, compare, contrast, get down on themselves, force, control, and use their own personal power, which is a form of interference. And it could, and I don't know the specific suffering it will cause, but I just know that it's violating so many principles. It will indeed cause suffering. Does that make sense? So when we do the hunting power, like a hunter, you're imagining yourself like a hunter almost, stalking yourself, which is another reason that Gene's technique is a cheat code, because you can actually observe yourself from a third person perspective. What are you doing? Why are you about to tell that lie, Ernest? Doesn't even make any sense. It's because you're focused on yourself and how the other views you. So you're going to stretch the truth so that their view of you is more in alignment to your own reflection that you're projecting. That is a bunch of bullshit. And it's one of the most common things that occur in the world today. That is ordinary cognition. So when I outline the techniques of hunting power, and I show, that these techniques are what we're doing when we're hunting, you are observing your behavior. You're using the rule of 3 to redirect if necessary, because some behaviors could be actually quite detrimental, and it's up to you to choose which ones you want to focus more intently on or not. So you're watching them, you're paying attention to how they make you feel, but because you're so practiced, you don't stay in that feeling and you don't make it worse. You're just aware of it. You're hyper aware of everything that's occurring. And that's one of the derivatives of the first 3 layers of the practice, is impeccable self-awareness. Does that make sense? So that's why it could be so dangerous, is because we are literally focusing on our behaviors, but we're doing it in a way of non-resistance, not trying to control, non-interference. And we're just paying attention to how things feel, and we're letting behaviors drop naturally and on their own. And that is not represented in the world today. So for some people, it could sound far-fetched until we start to give people more examples of our own behavioral change, which I could do all day long. I could sit here and just talk about, and I could still talk about the shit that hasn't changed. That way I don't look like, some sort of deity up here. So there are things that still, I would really like to see them, move and become something a little bit different over time, and they will. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to declare war on it. It's going to change because the flashlight of my awareness and my intent is going to change it. And then eventually we start to talk about intent directly. And that is going to be so far from a person's human experience because they're not used to interacting with intent directly. And when we start to interact with intent directly, you can change your behavior on a dime. Does that make sense? And if the behavior changes, so look at this, the mind has changed, the behavior has changed, the output has changed, you will not continue to recreate the same cycles of suffering. You are stepping outside of the repetitive cycles of suffering that you have created your whole life, that I have created my whole life. such as taking things personally. Why the fuck would I do that? Why would I allow myself to think that? But I could still, so in the hydraulic, I still feel the pull, and that's okay. If the pull is strong, I'll redirect back to my practice and increase the degree of paying attention to the present moment on purpose. And if I need to, I'll use a mantra. I haven't had to lately, but I'm not above mantras. Shit, they're a part of my toolbox. Does that make sense? One of the primary techniques of hunting power is to place the flashlight of your awareness on personal power itself. The feeling of personal power we can actually identify and intensify through attention alone. And that feels like I can do anything. So at the beginning, when we started this, we had the vision of centers, we had the vision of a practice that everybody could do and books. Give me 5 more years. I'm not on a timeline necessarily, but I will have my doctorate. Dr. Ernest Krolik will have books. We will have we already have an organized Qigong practice. My guess is we'll have other people who share Qigong in an organized fashion because they do it themselves. I'll be able to offer it in the setting of a clinic, a center. Look at the conscious creation that's occurring. Now, one of the fickle things about conscious creation, though, is that you can't affect other people. You're not controlling people. So will my book ever sell or get popular? I really don't know. Will things get I can't control other people. I don't know where their minds will go and how this will rest, but I will do what I'm here to do, and what I'm here to do is what I want to do, which is create. So that will be a continuous part of the process. The only reason I'm mentioning this is because surely you can see the conscious creation element in it. I'm in the city I want to be in for the reasons I want to be here. I'm doing the things that I want to do for the reasons that I want to be here, that I want to do them. I'm in a work environment that has absolutely no toxicity. That was a big focus of mine, even without thought, even without words. I intuitively knew that a non-toxic work environment is possible. And I created that without trying to control, without trying to manipulate, and even without focusing on the words. I created it. No words, no thoughts are necessary. It is the constant focus of attention leads to the constant, everything is where you put it.
But it was because you were doing it internally and externally at the same time. Like the whole practice was in place. It wasn't because you created, you magically fell into this, although there is that magic that I like. But it's because you were the intention aligned with the desire.
Yes.
It was because you're practicing inside and what feels good and what doesn't feel good. See, this is where law of attraction comes in for me, because when your internal aligns with your external, then those things come together because you're compatible with it and it is compatible with you, and therefore everything is where you put it. So that to me is how the law of attraction works.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can be, without this practice, it can be, what we're talking about is wildly unreliable, because what we're talking about is feel good versus not feel good. If I'm addicted to crack is going to feel good. If I'm addicted
Oh, I
to money
understand
or,
all that, but what I'm saying is that this place is that place for you, not just because of what it's because you don't see toxicity the same way either. You don't allow certain things to be toxic to you, like taking things personally. So those things change. So the right work environment will be there because you have made yourself more compatible to it.
sure.
That's all I mean, is it works,
Yeah.
the energy comes both ways.
Yeah, I think that's adaptation, right? What are you adapting to? The thing that this practice does specifically is it leads to the path of authenticity. And what do I mean by authenticity? Where is the interference? The way that we're thinking, the way that we're behaving, and it's very likely being led by all 5 destroyers. Which is why sometimes when people talk about feel good, it is wildly unreliable. I know that's not exactly what Donna was talking about, but it's still an important point and a good segue to show that with hydrostasy, we're not focusing on good feelings versus bad feelings, because the capstone can be present no matter how bad we feel. And that's still a part of conscious creation. But the reason I want to point this out is because it's important to the practice and what we call the hydrostatic effect. And that's a topic that I had planned to talk about a little bit later, but I'll just add it now since I'm not going to be able to get through all 20 topics because I only have one more week before my classes start. But it looks like the Pokemon ball. Although we can assume, I can't draw moving pictures, but we can assume that that little dot isn't always in the center. It's kind of moving back and forth. If it's closer to center, and remember this is a moving circle, all of it's moving across that infinite number line that I've created. So maybe I could make it like, from this circle we see an arrow, and from this circle down here we see an arrow, because this circle is in motion. All of it's in motion. It's not a stagnant circle. And what we would call, when we're closer to center, is the act of alignment. And alignment is a big word that we use in the law, or that other people use in the law of attraction. Alignment to what? Very rarely will people be able to tell you alignment to what. Now, this does have a feeling derivative that we start to pay attention to in the hunting power practice, which is the feeling of personal power. You can usually find that feeling in the Dantian area, which is why the first 3 layers of the practice focus on placing attention into that area, breathing with it, working with it with imagination, because it will be an integral part of where do we feel our personal power. And personal power can be present when we don't feel good, when things aren't going our way. It's that feeling of, okay, yeah, I could very well die, but you know, I'm stronger than that tendency, or maybe that desire to create poor me, or to start thinking those thoughts that will exacerbate the symptoms and yada yada yada. So I can sit there with a stomach ache and still feel personal power. I'm going to get, and what does that do? It lends to my seeing. I'm going to get through this or I'm not. You know, this is the human experience. I'm going to feel some suffering. I'm not in this delusion of the internet where I want to feel good all the time, and just, that is because, and when somebody is thinking that, when somebody is engaging in that, that's because intelligence and desire are miles apart. And desire is very likely being led like a puppet, a kite being held by the 5 destroyers. For example, I hear young people talk about capitalism, anti-capitalism. Give any one of those fuckers $1 billion and they're going to keep every penny. So what the hell are you even really talking about, other than contradicting yourself between action and idea? You know, I see all these young activists talking about the earth and how nobody yada yada, and then you see these little fuckers out partying, and they're just leaving their shit everywhere. There's a huge gap between intention and will, between what we're talking about here. We shorten that gap, and then all of a sudden we're not going to litter because of how that takes away from our power, how we feel the imbalance in that, how we feel the violation of principle. Well, that's not 3 W's. And then we start to take accountability because of how it feels, but it's not good, it's not bad, it's the feeling of power. The feeling of personal power is one of those things that go beyond the good bad dynamic. Does that make sense? So I
Yeah.
see, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, yesterday I had a moment, and it's a behavioral change thing, which I absolutely love, when the realization comes on you a circumstance that I would have behaved differently in the past, and I could have been angry yesterday, and I almost tried to be angry, and then I couldn't remember what that felt like. But underneath it all, there was a line of smoothness. There was just a almost chuckle to myself in the middle of almost pretending to be angry because the anger wasn't there, if you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean. Yes.
So it was just a lovely thing. And even today, looking back on it, I thought I wasn't angry. Underneath, the feeling was like like that line that you're drawing with the bubble in the middle. There was a line of smoothness, is the only way I can put it. Oh well, a flat line, not a flat emotion, but a flat line that I wasn't going below.
More stable. I like the
Yeah.
smoothness. I like
Because your personal power, your peace was more important to you than whatever was. It was easy to see that this is just something happening, and what I have, the balance, the alignment that I feel is way more important than that. That doesn't have the power to take me out of where I am.
And then when you start practicing hunting power, what you would have done, Ida, in that situation is focus on the feeling of personal power and taken that good feeling and expanded it and lengthened in it because you can, because you had the opportunity. It presented itself. It presented itself. You see the habit. You didn't participate in the habit because it's this, the system's working, whether we know it or not. You know, it's going to have, because it's principle based. So the principle base means it's going to happen if you do it. And so you feel those. And so if you were doing, you know, and it's not, you know, you're doing your thing and that's great. And then I'm kind of just explaining how that would fit into a practice of hunting power, because we would see that and we would sense into that. And it reminds me of that Einstein, if you repeat the same experiment expecting a different result, that's insanity. But if you have a successful result and you don't repeat that experiment, that's stupidity. So what we do is we see the result and we sense into that. We highlight it, we expand it, just like we expanded the space so that it will, because what's the principle? Where you put your attention, it will grow, it will strengthen, it will get more visceral, it will get more powerful. And then we focus on that feeling of personal power. The feeling of personal power grows. And then before you know it, you look at a behavior and it hasn't quite broken up yet. That's fine, because your mind is no longer on an erroneous time scale. You know that you're going to be breaking up behaviors until you're 110. And if it becomes detrimental to your health, that's up to the person whether they want to use a little bit of their personal power to redirect that habit. And it will be easier, and you'll be able to do it if you want to, because you're doing this practice and you're not going to leak power and you're not going to go back to the erroneous times. That's the mind is always on this. When's it going to happen? When am I going to drop this habit? When are these things all going to come together? And I posted that, and I don't really like posting memes, but there was this one about, you know, the fisherman, and he was relaxing in his boat, and then the person's like, well, why don't you get more fish? And then he's like, well, why would I do that? And he's like, so that you can expand your operations and you can make more money, and then finally you can relax. But you have to look at them. He was relaxing before that. He had already found relaxation without all that other bullshit. And that's kind of the same thing.
So I was going to say something that you just touched upon, and then you went off it a little bit.
Yeah.
So hunting power is engaging the space of personal power, just in terms of behavior. So it's the same process.
It's
So
the
once
same
you,
process.
I see, that makes sense now to me.
Yes. But that process is almost impossible if a person hasn't created the space. They will get into erroneous timescales. They will start to
Right.
compare, contrast, control, get down on themselves. And Ida was doing the opposite of that. She couldn't help but notice. But then there was a little bit of maybe
Noticing.
yeah. But then also trying to create the anger. You know, I have actually done that. So I can't. But we won't continue to do that. Like, of course, that's not something we would continue to do. But I did that. I felt like I should be outraged. You know, I felt like I should be mad.
Let me talk myself back into it.
Yeah, yeah. So I understand. That is a little bit, I did it myself, Ida, and it is a little bit psychotic. in a manner of speaking. And yeah, it is funny, you know, but the good thing about it is that you're seeing it all. That is the act of seeing. So you're already putting the pieces of hydrostasy into place because Qigong is principle based. It will occur on its own. Just keep doing it and it will happen. That's the beautiful thing about this. Don't do it, you're on your own. Do it
What you
half-assed,
said,
it'll be half-assed.
sorry, what you said earlier, I was walking at the time and I couldn't, it was very windy here.
Mhm.
I was listening to what you were saying about hunting power, and Donna was asking about why you seen that as dangerous. But I can really see that from my point of view, that I leaked power around behavioral change and around my own habits, and crucified myself almost with the up and down roller coaster of leaking power around those things. So I can see really quite clearly that not having the space around that issue and not being able to see where the issue is around that the issue of leaking power is the thing that's stopping you. You mentioned that my behavior in the past was sporadic, and you weren't talking about me, but that sort of hit me that sporadic was right. I would have went through maybe 2-3 weeks on willpower alone and beating myself up, and then back to doing absolutely nothing. There's somebody walking behind my car and it's beeping. That's it. He's away. And so, yeah, I can see how that whole roller coaster without the space there would have been, you know, hunting power without that. I think I have tried to hunt power with leaking power at the same time, and it's just too painful.
It is. It is.
So
And
yeah.
when you say willpower alone, that reminds me that is what I mean by we're using more energy than what is necessary, and that's a form of force. Sometimes a person may deem it necessary. Maybe they get a diagnosis and they know that they need to stop this tomorrow. They're going to use that personal power, that willpower. I'm not one to judge. You know, we're biological entities. We want to fight for survival. It is going to use some of your vital life essence in order to do that. It is your vital life essence, so it's your choice. I would still recommend being able to engage the space before any of that. And that is a part of hunting power. I can lend to some ways when you see something and you just want to stop it, but drop it is the better word, because it just drops like an apple. You just drop it. You just shake your little tree and it falls. But what Ida was talking about is like if we're still leaking power, before you know it, we're going to look at habits and we're going to be like, starting Monday, you know, starting the first of the year, I'm going to start doing this, that, and yeah, let's just put all that shit to bed. It's not necessary. And I can't emphasize enough that if we're talking about hydrostasy, engaging the space comes first. When I drew that pyramid the other day, where the base of the pyramid is appreciation, the base of appreciation lends to the feeling of contentment. If you're bored or otherwise at odds with the moment, you're not content. You can be content and create. You can be content and create an absolute masterpiece work of art. So sometimes people associate content with stagnicity. That is not the same thing. It's that doesn't make any sense. So we have the baseline of appreciation. I don't need to use words anymore for that, but the first 3 layers of the practice help me because I used words to create it. But now, because I engaged the space first, I can feel and sense into the feeling of appreciation instantaneously. I don't need a circumstance. If a circumstance is there, I'm going to appreciate the shit out of it. If there's no circumstance there, I'm going to appreciate the shit out of it. Have or not have and still feel free. If you require the vacation to feel free, you are a slave. You are trapped. It is called psychological enslavement, metaphysical enslavement. I don't like the word metaphysical. Let me retract that from the official statement. What do you mean? What are the other steps? What other steps?
You were going to break down techniques for hunting
No, I
power.
wasn't. No, that'll be in the book.
No.
Or I'll deliver the techniques one-on-one.
Okay.
Yep, that's taking responsibility. I have outlined it. but I will only give the specific techniques, the specific how to, because also in order to hunt power, we also have to have the axis of hydrostasy. I know, I put all kinds of prerequisites in front of this thing to make sure that it's not detrimental to somebody's practice and ultimately detrimental to the person, because I'm going to say it, this is a big one. Indulging is injurious to the spirit. Choosing to exist in an extreme injures the spirit, which injures the physical body over time, and then the psychology is injuring the body, the spirit is injuring the body, everything is out of balance, and before you know it, we're all fucked up. We're all twisted up, our spider's web is a hot mess, and we die a terrible, painful death early. That was morbid, I know, but I am being very cautious. So
Yeah, but you know what? We spend a lot of time talking about the people who follow Abraham
yeah,
and you know what? Your people, your whole, let's say your whole vision of what you want to put out there is done. They're gonna pick up book 4, 5, 7, 8, whatever it is, and they're gonna want to get there, and then there's gonna be a whole bunch of people talking about stuff that they don't really understand. So that's just, you can't
no,
prevent
I know.
that.
No, not prevent, take responsibility for. So no, like if I say I will only give hunting power to somebody and it starts to sound like gatekeeping, once they send me an email and we have a little chit chat and I want to make sure, and then they take that, sell it, put it on the internet, share it with everybody, and now I had nothing. I could not have controlled. That was well beyond but I still took responsibility. My intent is all that mattered, and my intent was to be very careful and cautious with how I deliver this. So as long as I'm true to my own intent, I can't take responsibility for results that are other people's intent. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't agree.
Well, okay.
I don't
So
agree, but I don't have to, we don't have to agree. But I remember a time when you were not going to talk about hydrostasy and you weren't going to talk about abstract principles because you were unable to talk about them. There were
I'm able
just
to
some
talk about
things
it now.
we can't talk about,
Oh,
but we
right.
talk about it a lot, plenty.
Oh, because you guys are doing it. I
Okay.
wouldn't be sitting here talking about hydrostasy if everybody was just touching on counterbalance. Heck no. What would be the point? But the more that you and others, I don't want to, point out where people's practices are and that kind of stuff, but the more that folks are talking about certain things, asking certain questions, it's a clear indication that now's the time to talk about hydrostasy, introduce engaging the space, right? And start talking about, so, okay, the beginning, this needs to be in place. These techniques need to be in place before hunting power can occur. And the reason is because this will elongate the space in order to engage it. And it is called, and it was going to be the last topic, and I'll save this whiteboard, but it is the axis of hydrostasy. If the axis of hydrostasy is in place, you are prepared to hunt power. If the axis of hydrostasy is in place, then you can just go by principle alone. You don't need anything else but the abstract principles, and you can hunt power. So all three of those will start to work together. All right, so let me give you the first techniques. And so we have what we call the 4 directions. This is, and I love that Donna has seen this, and I would put that in the category of seeing perspective. You're able, you can more clearly observe multiple facets of the same thing. But it is still, what I'm doing is building and refining the exact same thing, not constantly learning a bunch of new shit, because that can get very confusing. But we have the 4 directions of attention. You start working with the 4 directions of attention in basic alignment. Of course, you're not maintaining them. You're just choosing which of those 4 directions you want to come back to and remind yourself of, check in, yada, yada, yada. Okay. Lauren, can I ask real quick what yikes was in reference to, just so I don't miss anything? Just in case I should touch on something. What do you mean by yikes? I just now saw that. Was it my morbid statement about a painful death? Oh, sorry. That was a little graphic. Okay, so we are assuming that we understand what the 4 directions of attention is. We understand that in warrior training, we will start to establish, at least sporadically, multiple points of attention in multiple directions. And then in hydrostasy, we start to play with establish your 4 directions and maintain them. That's creating the space. So that's the beginning of hydrostasy technique. Does that sound familiar, Donna? Okay, so we have our 4 directions, and I would send you messages, and I would say, all right, establish your 4 directions, engage your 4 directions. That will create space. Engage that space, and you have just walked through the first gate of seeing. We make sense? Okay. Then I get specific with the 4 directions. So the 4 directions will equal. All right. Now this is and there are a couple different triangles, or there's a couple different axis points. One of them is internal alchemy, and internal alchemy involves it's traditional Chinese medicine. I'm not going to get into that today. That is a part of hydrostasy, which means that it would be a part of hunting power. But I'll probably only have time to go into one of these, so I'm only going to go into one of them. And all of this is made easier because you've been practicing up to this point. But we have whole body awareness. An expanded bubble of perception. These all should sound like individual techniques that you've been doing already. Those first 2. That makes sense, right? Whole body awareness and our expanded bubble of perception.
But if you're doing the 4 directions within the 4 modes, you are expanding your bubble of perception.
Hopefully, yeah. And then this one is you are paying attention to that expansion. So basically, you're feeling the world like a bubble, and you're expanding it, and that creates the proprioception to the nth degree.
Right.
You're really so basically, this is a way to expand proprioception, your awareness of your body in space and time. Yes, Ida, I'll definitely put this recording up. I think I still have one to put up though. But yeah. And this is a technique, by the way. So this is one of the things that I'm doing as I walk throughout my day, as I walk to work, as I walk around the clinic. And these connect. Whole body awareness and expanded bubble of perception connect, and they start to feel like one technique because you have your whole body and you have all of space and time, and you're paying attention to both. And this one is tricky because it is an accumulated, but it's the convergences of breath. So it's not just breath awareness, but you have converged the 3 convergences of breath, and your awareness is on that. With me so far? The 3 convergences of breath is something I could talk about another time. But the first 3 layers are building to that, right? That's why we started with posture training and basic alignment, because one of the convergences of breath is physical relaxation. One of the ways that we achieve physical relaxation is through postural alignment and a relaxed mind, and then breathing techniques. So you already have been given some breathing techniques in warrior training, is what I'm saying, and as a part of formal practice. So none of this will be foreign. And then the big one, engage the space deliberately. That's the cognition. And I have a bunch of these axes, like there's axes, I have different ones. And some of them are situational. I have one that I use when I'm exerting physical energy, for example. And it involves personal power. Big surprise. So this is one of what I call an axis of hydrostasy that will help to create more space so that you can establish your triangle. Or you can establish the hydrostasy triangle, or your own. Because you can also deliberately modulate to what you want to. I'm not going to tell you not to. That would be silly. spoiler alert, eventually this is the thing that we pay attention to, is the luminous effect. That is enough of a person's cognition. That encompasses all 4 directions. And that is the final technique of hydrostasy, is to engage the luminous effect. The Dalai Lama can call it mere luminosity in meditation. I call it mere luminosity in life. And it is the ultimate technique for adaptation. You are supremely adaptable when you are in the luminous effect. It's like you're walking through it. And there is no end. It's not like a forest, you're just walking through it. So this is one of the techniques that I would begin to offer for hunting power. Because with this technique, notice how I can create the bubble of perception. In this drawing, I can create that bubble of perception. And I can feel my whole body awareness. Well, all of my physical behavior is visible. I have an expanded bubble of perception with my whole body awareness. I see myself supremely in space and time. So I see all of my behavior as it's occurring. The convergence of breath, you'd be surprised how much of your behavior will, your breath will be influenced by your behavior. So the moment that your breath starts to change, you're like, oh, wait a second. Why did my breath start to quicken and my heartbeat start to increase its pace? And then you'll also start to notice that the space starts to shorten, and you start to feel the pull towards thought. So we're engaging the space. We have the convergences of breath in this moment. This is a technique I'm talking about. So this means that all of these are active, and this is my walk to work. My breath is relaxed, it is intentional, and I'm using the least amount of muscular tension in order to perform the breath as I walk. I'm engaging the cognitive space, which I can feel in my forehead. I feel it in my head, so I can place my attention on that cognitive space. And then I'm also aware of my body in space and time. So I'm aware of my body, I'm aware of space and time, and that's the other 2 directions. And they kind of become one big thing. And eventually the 4 different directions start to become one big circle, and that is the luminous effect. So that's one, and of course, when I go into hunting power and I go into hydrostasy, I'll deliver more of these. Some are situational, when we're up against a really heavy type of habit, we really want to settle ourselves even more into personal power, not trying to control, not trying to manipulate, and being okay with doing a behavior that we know isn't beneficial for us because we're in this dynamic. We know that we're chipping away from it. It didn't feel as good as when I did it completely oblivious in complete habit. And so now we have a system where the mind is more healthy, the body is more healthy, the spirit is more healthy. And by healthy, I mean in alignment to one another and in alignment to the moment itself, allowing us to grow. I don't like the word healing because now we're constantly healing. I'm not constantly healing because I'm not constantly fucking broken, but I am constantly growing, and sometimes there are growing pains, and that's called learning. Because sometimes there are thunderstorms on the sea, and that's just the way it is. And that's why you've probably noticed I don't use the word healing unless we're talking about it physically. Like, did you cut yourself? Put some Neosporin on it and relax your mind, and it will heal. All right, any questions? So that should be enough. Like, in terms of technique, go do that and then get back to me. And then I can offer other techniques that involve slightly other things. Sometimes the cognition direction can be replaced with deliberate, specific, and intentional imagination, for example. Depending on the situation, you can modulate that cognition aspect. 3 convergences of breath stays. That I don't really modify that too much. Oh no, I do actually, because I'll do warrior breathing, which is reverse abdominal breathing if I'm in a physically exerting moment, which is breath technique as opposed to just that smooth, natural flow of breath. Because maybe I'm picking up something really heavy. It'll still be as smooth as possible, but I'll be using reverse abdominal breathing to help create that. For some reason, I need to accentuate my relaxation response, then I'll do more accentuated abdominal breathing. And I talk about that in formal practices of warrior training. Any questions? That's why sometimes the technique of it's hard to talk about because we have to back all of this up. What I just shared on this whiteboard is impossible if you're not engaging multiple directions of attention simultaneously. Practicing that so you can refine it and it can become more fluid. Okay, questions, comments, concerns. I think that's it for Hunting Power. And then when you get the book or you start to see the videos, then it will have many, many more specific techniques like this axis of hydrostasy. And then you can begin to build your triangle. And that is called conscious create. You're deliberately choosing and creating how you want to feel. Everything we talked about from day one. It's just now organized in a way that another person can replicate it. Thank you very much. Great class today. But are there any questions? I feel like there should be. I feel like this would be a Q&A day with behavioral change especially, but I don't know. Maybe the way we've been talking about things for so many years, it's all making sense. All right, so it won't be long and we will have a website. It won't be long and we will have separate books on Qigong and I'll put them all together into a compendium. And then eventually I could see 5 years, 10 years down the road, we have an illustrated compendium and all kinds of fun things, workbooks and all kinds of stuff. But, you know, that's how it goes. Little bit by little bit by little bit. We just watch things grow naturally without trying to control because I'm not trying to force anything. My intention is clear. Create it, put it out there, see what happens. I did my job. Or better put, my responsibility has been met. And we're all learning. Because that's the point of the system, is to put yourself in the position where you learn and grow.
Can you show the triangle again?
Sure. Oh, did you want me to illustrate the triangle though? But that's it. It's blank.
Yeah, to fill it in.
Yeah, hold on a second. Let me do this. Now, keep in mind, you can have a personal and you can have the hydrostasy triangle. The hydrostasy triangle is shared because we're human beings. So we're going to be able to share certain states of being. I have isolated what I believe are the most beneficial and the most shareable. Now, when you create your personal triangle, you will fill in these first three yourself with whatever. I don't know. It's your life. You know what I mean? Like for me, it could be 1970s brown or something, but somebody else might, it's like, what does 1970s brown feel like? And it's like, well, if you don't know, you don't know. Sorry, like this wasn't for you. Luminous. That's a tough word. So the shared triangle will include appreciation as the base. And Mike, remember that if we're talking about this triangle, we are not using words necessarily to create this. We're engaging the space, and from the space, we can immediately modulate to appreciation. Hold appreciation long enough and you will feel contentment. Contentment is neither being bored nor odds with the present moment, not trying to control it, not trying to manipulate it, but you can still create in it, you can still thrive in it, you can still collaborate in it. So by no means does contentment equate to stagnicity or not moving. It just means happiness. And then appreciation builds, gains momentum. Then we can feel contentment. Contentment builds, and we can feel more appreciation, more contentment, more relaxation. And that leads to something that I call freedom, or we could call it dream walking. Call it other things too. But that's it feels like freedom. Call it dream walking. Questions so far? So in the first capstone, you can see the universal perspective. In my best hipster voice, you are actively engaging and perceiving we're all one, man. We're just one big thing and all connected. Well, you're actually feeling that in the moment with this capstone. It's not just pretentious bullshit. Or an excuse for indulgent
Right.
behavior. The love movement was just an excuse for indulgent behavior in a time where religious ideology was very popular. All right, so we have our universal perspective, which is it is an act of seeing where you're engaging that expanded view. And for some reason, the other half of that triangle is escaping me. Although I have it on a note card somewhere because I walk around with it all day. But yeah, so this is the essential elements of the hydrostasy triangle. And I'll think of what this other one is and let you know. I'm forgetting what one half of the capstone is, how I word it. Sometimes it's tricky taking feelings and putting them into words. But I have it here somewhere. I'll just find it and let you know. Does all that make sense though? What I've written up here, Mike? And it builds. And then you get to that luminous effect. And the luminous effect can be engaged and maintained and everything else, just like everything else we've ever talked about. And then I'm just
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm trying to think of it also.
the other half of the triangle. I know, like it's weird how I can remember things or forget things that like I'm interacting with like every single day. Where is it? Just create space. Feel into it. It'll come back to me. But any questions about any of that? Give me a second, because I'm picturing myself yesterday on my walk to work, because I put it into words right before I crossed the street. Like I can remember myself doing it, and I put it into words with the universal perspective, and then that other feeling that I put into words. What is that other feeling that I put into words? Now I'm gonna look real quick. I'm gonna cheat because I've put it into the chat group before. I promise not to leak power once I see it. Yeah, shouldn't have forgotten that. Okay. It was my favorite part, and I forgot how to put that into words. The underlining quality of the moment.
The abstract quality of the moment.
When I use the word abstract, I mean apparent to you, but not necessarily apparent to another person. It is underlying. but it's a feeling. You can feel the quality of the present moment, and I call it the artist's edge. One of the things is that the human race strives for non-ordinary cognition. We love non-ordinary cognition. We just don't know how to get there without things and stuff and situations and trying to control and manipulate. But Shayna's picture, Lauren's picture, all of that is an example of Lauren took that picture in the trees with that light because she saw the underlying quality of that moment, just like Jean's doing with the sunset, just like Shayna did with the wooden bench and that perspective. It's all an act of seeing. Perspective. You're seeing a larger perspective. So Mike, how difficult is it to go around just thinking dumb shit all day about things and stuff and situations, and when we have the ability to access the underlying quality of the moment and the expanded perspective of oneness that leads to the feeling of shining luminosity? What the fuck? Like, what are we doing? What are we doing in the human experience when that's not our focus on how it's not an achieve? You don't get there, you engage it, you put your attention on it, you shine it, you enlarge it because you're putting your attention on it. The trick is just finding it with your attention. And the way to do it is by creating space in the overall amount of cognition, entering a state of non-interference, and ultimately what we call, I think we were calling that the sixth pillar, the active adaptation.
The underlying quality, I think you call the abstract.
Mhm.
The other side of the capstone, the abstract quality of the moment.
Yeah, abstract quality. Yeah. Oh, I wrote that up there. And then that leads to something that I call the luminous effect. And the luminous effect can be maintained while you do everything else. And drum roll, please, the moment you start to move outside of your hydrostasy balance, luminosity is the first thing to go. The sounds of Chicago. I don't know if you can hear all the sirens. All right. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Does all that make sense, Mike, that triangle?
It is. It's like
Yeah.
when Ida talked about trying to make herself mad. Like I'm sure in the noticing of her not being mad, she could feel the abstract quality of the luminosity of the moment. And then when she tried to make herself bad, or she even referenced sensationalizing a little bit about it, thinking about it, chuckling to yourself, just observing it is fine. But if the thoughts about it carry you away, I find that when walking on the beach, I notice nature and animals in nature and how they are interacting with the abstract quality. They are just doing it. And when I am in the space to be able to see it, the seeing of it and the experiencing of it makes me feel very connected. But as soon as I have thoughts about it or thought streams about it or let my heart race about it or sensationalize about it, the luminosity disappears.
Yes. It's the slider. All right, well, I have outlined and already started working on basic alignment, and I have started to outline warrior training. It's going to take some time to create like the formal practices, not create the formal practices, but like create videos. Actually, I could probably just find all the videos I've done already because I've already delivered all of the stuff at some point. So, yeah. So the practice will be super duper accessible. All right. Any other questions? Is that good?
I think it's easier just to recreate it because if you go back and find it, you've changed since you posted it, and then there would be things you want to tweak anyway. So
Yeah.
you might as well just do it from where you are.
Yeah. And I could also do that in one-on-ones if somebody is interested in going through the specific physical aspects of warrior training. I could start to take you through those. And I do view Tai Chi the way that, and I talked to Dr. Jha about this at the clinic because we've talked about this extensively. The way that we're doing Tai Chi is one of the best ways to interact with the internal energy of the body. move it, and you're using intent directly to interact, not trying to control and force, but you're moving the energy around, and that will lead to better health. You'll feel better, more vitality, more energy, more interest. Everything starts to move more fluidly. So you're interacting with your own energy body directly using intention, not trying to control anything or anything like that. E leads Chi. Same thing. All right. So yeah, just let me know. I think I'm going to look at my schedule because I may, let's see, I can look at it right now. Yeah, Thursday, because we do classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Might have to switch things to Wednesday. I'm going to look at my schedule and let everybody know. But my school schedule starts May 1st. So that's the Doctorate of Acupuncture program. And that's 2.5 years. So we'll be doing that. I'll be doing that for a little while. You guys don't have to do anything. Sorry. Okay. Well, I will see you guys again on Thursday for group study. I think I have 2 videos to post. I'm not going to be able to get through all the topics, actually, because we just talked a little bit about the axis of hydrostasy. Internal alchemy is another technique that can be used in conjunction, one of the techniques of hunting power, because it's a technique of hydrostasy. So the techniques are very similar. One of the main differences in hunting power is you do focus on that feeling of personal power, and you're specifically watching behaviors, including emotional habits and other types of habits, habitual behaviors. We talked about the hydrostasy effect. I think maybe one of the things that we could talk about is that 6th pillar. What does it look like with the act of alignment? And then that should round things out very nicely. That pyramid is how we deliberately modulate. If you notice, the capstone will include sensing energy, because that proprioception, the underlying quality, can be different. And that's the sensing the energy and processing it to memory. And you can recall that later if you want to. But then we get into the act of adaptation, which really is a lot of hunting power. That's what hunting power really is ultimate adaptation to your own behavior as opposed to the world around you. But, they all go hand in hand. It's all connected. All right, so I'll see you on Thursday for a group study, and then we'll have one more Tuesday, I think, before I start classes. So, yeah, that's it. All right, see you guys again soon. Bye, everyone.